Good night, good night, good night. Good night, everybody. Come on in. When I say love, you know what I mean. You are free to be unconditionally. Not a feeling or emotion. Follow your heart's direction. It's a value of self. Beyond looks and status and fame and wealth. It's looking in the mirror and say, love. Again and again and again. It's love. Love is love. Love is love. Love is love. All right, bring me up. Respect no heart for my love, I have no apology. I want legislation, recognition, legal and social decriminalization to all barring the. Hello, good night, good night, good night, good night. Good night, good night, good night. Good night. Are we on? Is it recording? Good night, good night, good night. Good night, good evening, good morning, maybe good greetings to whatever part of the world you are in. And welcome to yet again another episode of Everything A to Zoe. This is episode 3, and this episode we have a special episode in store for you. This episode is titled Women in Action. Let's go. Hi, are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for season 2 of Everything A to Zoe? Welcome to yet again another episode of Everything A to Zoe. And this season, it's all about everything Trini Christmas. But guess what? We are changing the time. That's right. Everything A to Zoe is now on Monday nights at 8 p.m. live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. On my channel, Zoe Sazzle. So join us every Monday night as we kick off your week right. Real topics in real time, in real TNT, with your host, me, Zoe Sazzle. This is Everything A to Zoe, Season 2. That's right, it's season 2. Good night and welcome, everybody. As I mentioned at the top, tonight we have a very special, very significant, very important episode of Everything A to Zoe. In as much as this is season 2, it's the Trini Christmas Edition, and we've been having so much fun with you all season long. We have come to the place in our season where we must acknowledge the reality of the times that we're currently living in. Our main tagline for this show is real people in real time, in real TNT. And right now things are really real. So this episode is dedicated to the state of our women presently in Trinidad and Tobago. And as I said, the episode is titled Women in Action. It's episode 3. Tonight we have an amazing panel. We have an amazing panel of women that have given their time and energy in the midst of where their work is at its peak. And so I want to bring them on. But before we bring them on, good night, Ali. Good night, darling. Yes, we're live. We're inside. Send a friend, a family member, like, share. We're on until 9 p.m. We have an entire show to go for tonight. But before we get into tonight's panel, I want to bring to the screen a beautiful segment. And the reason why we bring this segment to begin tonight's show is because I think it's the perfect note to begin the statements that may come after. So let's take in this segment. It's called On My Xmas Record. And this installment is with the incomparable vocalist Staphanie Joseph. And she'll be performing for us Hallelujah.
I heard there was a secret chord that David played, and it pleased the Lord.
on just Hallelujah. That was her rendition of Hallelujah. We just had a little glitch there with the screen. Yeah, her rendition of Hallelujah. And on my Xmas record was a segment that we kind of filmed to incorporate some amazing talent into this season. So I hope you enjoyed. Staphanie could be followed on Instagram at Moon's Music. And one of the reasons why I decided to play her video, we played her video last week, but one of the reasons I decided to play it again this week is because she's such a beautiful voice, and what she sang really touched me on this topic. Lots of love to you, Zoe, and the whole XS studio. Excited for tonight. Thank you, Liam Rizendi. Without further ado, ladies and gents, we're going to kick off tonight with a panel discussion, and it's called Community Check-In. Right, and tonight our panel discussion is with 4 amazing panelists. Right, the first panelist we have is Dr. Gabrielle Hosein. She is a lecturer and head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. She's also been involved in the Caribbean feminist movement for the past 25 years. And her weekly blog, Diary of a Mothering Worker, is published in the Newsday. Welcome to the panel, Dr. Gabrielle Hosein. How are you doing tonight?
Thanks so much, Zoe. Thanks for having me here. Thanks for giving us, a chance to keep connecting about these issues.
Yes, definitely. Next up on the panel, we have Staphanie Leitch. Staphanie Leitch is one of the co-founders and lead at Womantra. Womantra is one of our leading feminist organizations. And Staphanie is also an author. And recently, Stephanie, you had an article that was recently published. Isn't that so?
Yes, I did.
Yes. So we welcome Staphanie Leitch, representative at Womantra, and the great work that Womantra has been doing in the midst of all of this. Up next, we also want to welcome to the panel Amanda Chukwan. Yeah, Amanda Chukwan is an interdisciplinary artist and the 2020 winner of the Johnson and Moy Achong Caribbean Writers Prize. She's half Jamaican, half Trini, and her writing deals with the intersection between identity, displacement, and cruelty. Amanda, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yes, Amanda is also the host of her own show in conjunction with the Bookus Lit Fest. So welcome. So happy to have you. We've been trying to connect since the first episode of the first season.
It's true. I feel like we've been trying to connect since we both lived in LA and came back.
Very true, very true. But with time and whatnot, everything works out well. And so the last addition to our panel, we want to welcome Renuka and Anjit. Renuka is a research assistant and PhD candidate at the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. Renuka, welcome.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone.
Renuka is also of Guyanese. Well, not just Guyanese, heritage. Renuka is Guyanese. And so one of the reasons why it was so important for me to invite on this panel and to share her voice was because sometimes we get to think that what's happening here is only happening here. And so I think a little broader Caribbean perspective is great. But nonetheless, all of these women, each of you in your own, you stand both in the actual work of defending women, of making sure that the country is paying attention to the rights of women and the ways in which those rights are being violated. And so thank you all for joining me, because we are in a very critical and crucial moment in time. So welcome. All right, so for tonight, the first question we wanted to get into is I wanted to get some perspective from each of you on how do you believe we've gotten here? What are some of the factors responsible? And actually, sorry, before we get to how we've gotten here, kind of assessing where we're at now. It's the end of the year. It's been a very unique year in terms of this year being the year of COVID. And we know COVID has placed some exacerbating pressure on already gender-based violence and relationships between men and women, and just how a woman experienced life here in Trinidad. So I wanted to get a perspective from you all on what do you think the current state of affairs is?
Crisis, but I think it's always been crisis.
Right. Crisis. tough one to just enter into, I know. But yeah, I feel like beyond crisis, Stephanie, you were gonna say something.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna agree with Amanda. Gender-based violence has reached epidemic proportions, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but in the Caribbean region. And I just also want to make a plug that I'm also half Guyanese.
Hey, love that. Love that connection. Love that.
Yeah. But you know, none of this is new.
Right.
COVID-19 has definitely exacerbated the situation, and we see that the state has not been able to offer adequate response mechanisms at the community levels, at the health levels, including mental health, just financial support. You know, the effects of COVID-19 have been so devastating. And we see that really kind of like in a, what do you call those pots? Pressure cookers.
Pressure cooker. Yes, a pressure
Yeah.
cooker.
Yeah, happening at the family level. And not only in the family, but we see that extending outwards, like the most recent case with Ashanti, where she was just going to take a taxi. So it's not only happening in the home, it's also happening outside of the home, and we are at crisis stage.
Right. Crisis.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think just to add to that, yes, we're constantly in crisis. As women, we're constantly in crisis. As a society, women, our vulnerabilities are exacerbated during this time. There's so many. Stephanie spoke about COVID, but a lot of times when we think about responses from the state, we think about legislation, we think about how much funding is there, but we also have to look at what's being done at a community level, because a lot of times NGOs, civil society organizations, we're the ones who take the brunt of the response. We don't necessarily have all the resources, but then we are forced to kind of get creative, be very innovative in how we access those resources. So the state that we're in right now is not just violence upon women and bodies or so, but it's just the absence of resources to really adequately support the kind of work that we need to do.
Yeah, exactly.
No, totally. I feel as though what pivotal moments in history, like the one that we're currently experiencing, do, and also the refugee crisis, which is partly my specialty, is that they just cast a light on issues that already exist. So we're seeing, for instance, rates of violence committed against Venezuelan migrant refugee women also increase, but it's just part of a trend that also affects Trinidadian women and all women who live here as well. So I think it's quite interesting, because people think that, at least when it comes to issues of asylum and migration, that those are sort of part of a population that nobody else has to see or to deal with. But the fact of the matter is that these trends are overarching, and they really affect, particularly when it comes to gender, everyone.
And can I also just add that Venezuelan migrant women and other women, like Cuban women, for example, are also being murdered by Trinidadian men.
Exactly.
So you can't just say this is a migrant issue, this is separate and apart from our society. These issues are linked, because it's a broader issue of male domination and of toxic masculinity that affects all men.
Dr. Gabrielle?
Yeah, so, to tell you the truth, I feel like we are just all so weighed down by the violence that's happening, community violence, gang violence, gun violence, and then the kinds of violence that's happening on our streets, in our homes, in our taxis. For me, in the midst of all of that, the thing that I've been thinking about most is the way that we talk about violence as if it's separate. So we talk about domestic violence, and I don't mean the activists and women's movement, but we talk about domestic violence as if it's one thing, and then we talk about child sexual abuse as if it's another, and then we talk about what happened to Ashanti Riley, just 18 years old, as something else. And I found myself thinking a lot about sexual violence and sexual violence as a thread. So it's not so much, is it happening by someone we know? Is it happening by a stranger? Would we be protected if his name is on a registry, a sex offender, but thinking about how even in domestic violence, we underplay, we underemphasize the sexual violence that comes with domestic violence, and thinking about how sexual violence provides the thread that connects all of these, seemingly disparate, forms of threat, and just really thinking about the extent to which we need to name sexual violence, in a way that cannot isolate it to couples and interpartner conflict, or cannot isolate it to just children's vulnerability, but has to be, the society is one that was built on sexual violence fundamentally, and remains one that's built on sexual violence today, to which all women and girls all are vulnerable to different extents and to different degrees, depending on the nexus of their vulnerabilities.
And I'm so happy you raised that point of sexual violence being kind of an anchor point from which we can see the offshoots of so many other aspects of violence in the society, because it brings me to my next question that I want to throw out, which is, what do, from your purviews, from the place in society that you sit, from the reports that you get from both your organizations and the women just connected into your lives, what do you all think are the factors that are at play currently that are responsible for kind of where we're at now, in this kind of moment? There are a couple, and yes, we can take it all the way back to colonialism, and I don't want to play, and we say take it all the way back, but all the way back really is still very present right here and right now, still operating and still influencing right now. So I'm curious as to your perspectives on what the factors are at play.
From my perspective,
is a great jump off point from that. Yeah.
From my perspective, I guess, which is, I suppose, a slightly more philosophical one, I've just been wondering if it's just our society's way of flattening experiences and of not being specific about different types, or not different types, but different women's experiences. So for instance, again, if you're speaking specifically about a displaced population, there's a way in which we sort of see the population as one, where we think of all women as just perhaps a single mother, perhaps an older mother. We have a very specific idea in mind of what a migrant woman might look like. And we sort of, because it's also the rhetoric that the government uses in terms of calling them economic migrants, we forget that the population itself is quite diverse, that there are people with different orientations, that there are people who are unaccompanied minors, that they are children, that they are elderly women, and that all of these people have very specific needs. We're all affected by patriarchy, but within that, there are various specific needs that we all need as the different kinds of women that we are. And I wonder about this not just in terms of gender, of issues of gender, but also issues of race. For instance, where we like to call ourselves a rainbow nation, but what that does is that flattens the experiences of the specific individuals within the nation who have to figure out how to get along with each other. And I just sort of wonder if that is a symptom of being Caribbean. But to get back to the topic at hand, what it does, I think, is that it basically limits the way that we talk about women's experiences.
Right. Okay. Staphanie.
Yeah. It's a big question. How did we get here? What is responsible? But
maybe even to just bring it down a little bit more from the grander how we got here, is kind of like some of the factors that play right now.
Yeah.
In December 2020. So yeah.
Well, I think at the core of a lot of the violence that happens between men and women is based on an idea and demonstration of ownership. I think that this idea that you can own another person, that person is yours, is really this type of possessive, obsessive ownership of another person that is really kind of reinforced by this idea of monogamy is really a problem. And it has very serious and obviously deathly effects. And you see that being played out all the time in the Trinidadian context. When a woman is trying to leave, she is in the most danger. When
Right.
she's trying to establish her independence, her
Independence, yeah.
autonomy, take control of her own life, is when she's killed. And it's because their partners don't think that they should be able to live a free life away from their dominance. So that's one part of it. I think another part of it is the fact that men know that they can perpetrate this kind of violence without consequence.
Without consequence, exactly.
Consequence. And that happens at the community level. You know, neighborhoods, families, communities know that violence is happening, and
And
they
they know
need
the
to
perpetrators
prevent
of
it.
the violence and to protect them.
Exactly. And it doesn't need to be, you know, in this kind of public response, like call the police. It could just be talk to the man next door and tell him stop beating his girl. You know,
Conversation,
community
right?
interventions are not happening the way that they should. And also the state response is inadequate. So we have the police often showing up after women are murdered, and that cannot be the solution. There needs to be a strategic plan that involves all of the stakeholders who are working on gender-based violence to be working in tandem with each other in a systematic way
Right,
immediately.
right. And that plan, I just want to add, should be that plan has to be structured from the perspective of the victim accessing it, not so?
Well, I mean, it's many moving parts. So,
Right, yeah, I'm asking, yeah.
yeah. So, yes, service provision is definitely an important part of that. So, how are victims or survivors accessing services? How are they accessing legal support? How are they accessing mental health support? And, you know,
Right.
through Womantra becoming more involved in service provision, we have gotten a much broader idea about how much support is actually out there, but people
Available.
just simply don't know how to access it. And they have to jump through a million hoops after they've already been through a traumatic experience. And we need to do better, and that's it.
Yeah, I agree. Dr. Gab, I'm curious as to your thoughts, and Renuka, on some of the factors at play as to us being in this state right now.
Well, I mean, Stephanie really, really focused on the key ones. I think, I was having a conversation with Roberta Clark, who's a feminist and one generation ahead of me. I'm a generation ahead of some of you here, and or more. And she was saying to me, violence is almost decriminalized. Violence against women and girls is almost decriminalized to the extent that it happens with impunity. All kinds, it's almost as if the tolerance of it can be seen in the low levels of prosecutions and convictions. And I think when you look at the rates, Steph, I can't remember what the Spotlight program document says, but I think it comes down to something like 17% of cases, or so if women report, there's a systematic fallout of women until you finally get, I don't remember what the percentage is, but until you finally get to conviction. And because women and girls, because children, and I mean the sexual violence affects boys to a great extent in our society, also creating violent men, let's be real. And because those who are victims of violence know that the system is not going to protect you. It may protect a handful, but it will be so traumatic to get to the point where you experience whatever makes you feel as if you have attained justice and have the capacity now to heal with the support of the community, the state, and the nation, that in a sense, impunity rules. And as long as that remains the case, we can go back to slavery and indentureship and colonialism. And I think that that's correct. But violence against women and girls happens globally across every social, economic, and political context, right? So it is, I think, not just our history, although our history creates the conditions, the historical conditions for it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in many ways it is literally the fact that violence occurs with tolerance by the state and
Right.
with huge impunity. And that is why so much activism focuses on state action, on state provision of justice, because the injustice creates the conditions for the violence to occur in the ways that it does, and for us all to be living in fear as a result.
Yeah, and there are also many ways in which the community is responsible for perpetrating that violence also, and perpetrating that impunity. Renuka, you go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to add, because as a society, we have a level of apathy that we operate with. At the end of the day, we're going to always be outraged, and then it'll die down, and then we'll wait until something else happens, and then we'll be outraged again, and then nothing happens. Because when we're having these conversations, who's a part of these conversations? A lot of times we're talking, we're talking among ourselves, we're trying to find solutions, but are we really engaging those persons that really need to have the conversation, that really need to hear the conversations? And then, it can only happen when a small number of people are working toward that goal. We really need to make sure that the conversation reaches everybody and we utilize every medium possible. But that can't come from civil society and activists only, or people in academia. It has to come from us at an interpersonal level, at a community level. It has to come from the education system. So, we'll have the conventional answers of, it's socialization or education. These are the things that can fix it. And they may sound cliche, but they are true, right? But it's how we treat and how we approach these things. We were in the meeting that Womantra had the other day, and Prof. Radok and Dr. Hosein were talking about, maybe it's time we consider going back to some tried and tested method. How about old-fashioned interventions, going out there, going into schools and talking with students? And that's part of the work that we do at IGDS Ignite and Catcall UE. It's having that kind of one-on-one kind of outreach. So it complements the work. So it has to operate at different levels, of course.
Right.
Cyber activism has its space. Community activism has its place. Academia has its place. Everything has its place, and everything serves a purpose. But we have to ensure that they intersect. But we also have to make sure that they're reaching the community and we're reaching the men. And a lot of conversations have been happening around male accountability and male allyship. And I saw up to today there was a paper, there was a feature with Rondell Fields from Single Fathers Association, and I'm not going to comment on it because it's not worthy of comment. It was just so distressing to read. But again, these are the people who are leading these conversations, and that's why we need a lot more men who understand, the root causes, they understand the root issues, and then they're not coming into the conversation to be, but not all men,
right. And
they need to say, well, we're here to listen.
Yeah, and the word you keep on bringing up is conversation. And I think that's ideal because it leads us into the next question, which I want to throw out to you all, which is, what are the conversations right now do you believe that we need to have? Before we get into this question, though, I want to let our viewers know that after this, we're going to just open up the floor for a couple of questions. So if you all want to send your questions in the comments after this, we're just we'll take some questions for the panel. But so the next thing I wanted to lead into is Sorry, Sab?
Sorry, Zoe. Before you move to your next question, I just wanted to say something quickly.
Okay.
And that is the responsibility of the media. So to just piggyback on what Rebecca was saying about how the message is reaching people. And it is very clear to me, based on the town hall that Womantra had last week, that people are listening and they want to know more.
Yes.
But also the media is a very key stakeholder in getting the message out there. And what I do not appreciate is journalists, insistence that they are objectively reporting the news. actually the time for that is over. You need to be responsible and you need to be critical and analyze the news that you are sharing. And some of the messages that are coming out, including from our state representatives, are damaging and are harmful. And even if the media chooses to carry those messages, they have a responsibility to say this is not the right message.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally.
Can I say
It's
something?
disgusting.
Thousands of people are reading the newspapers every day, and we need to be better and we need to do better.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
This cannot be emphasized enough. It makes me think of various examples that I have seen on social media. Even just today, Staphanie, I saw that you had posted about this insistence on not calling rapists. And again, it's the same thing. With regards to the Venezuela situation in particular, you see the media parroting some of the language used by our leaders and our representation. Our leaders cannot even get responses or solutions right when talking about women's rights issues or issues of women's safety. Recommending, for instance, that women carry weapons is not a holistic solution, and it is very far from the solutions that was just put forward by this panel. Exactly. So even thinking that that is an issue that relates to all women, but then you have to talk about specific issues that relate to specific experiences. How can you get from point A to point B to point C if you can't even get that messaging right? And I do also see a trend, again, with the media's insistence on objective reporting that isn't objective at all, that isn't taking the step forward to understand experience. And it is something that I find incredibly troubling. But also, there was one thing that you had said about conversations that I wanted to get into as well.
Before we jump into the conversations, Dr. Hosein, you were going to mention something about the media.
No, go ahead, Amanda.
Go ahead. Okay, all right, okay, let's jump in. Conversation.
I was just going to say that two separate conversations I've been having. It goes back actually to Dr. Hosein's point about burnout, about the exhaustion of the people, of the women working in this space. And there have been so many people approaching me and telling me and asking me, as though I, Amanda, am the keeper of everything that happens to women in our society. Why aren't we doing more? Why is it that we see, some sort of big gesture, some sort of protest, and then everything dies down? Right. And it's only and I am relatively new to working in this space, but on the outside, while I was on the outside, I might have had some of these criticisms as well. But gaining an insider's perspective means not only that you are the one who is burning out, but that you see how hard the women in the community work.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it's a small community of women.
Exactly. And I think that goes twofold.
Heavy lifters, power lifters. Go ahead, yeah.
Totally. It goes twofold because what that means is that people don't feel, that's an indicator to me that, that women feel, or that there are some women who may not feel empowered enough to belong to this space or to participate because maybe they feel as though their voices are being silenced, or they feel uncomfortable taking action in a particular way. But again, I mean, it's sort of like it's a bit of a catch-22, because the same actors are working and burning out and cannot necessarily physically respond to every single issue, to every single article, which creates an illusion of selectivity, which is a criticism that I had and that others had. But then when you're in it, you realize it's completely impossible. So that's a conversation I would love to have about.
I think everybody. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to add. So first of all, thanks for saying that. We all know it. We all know it well. I was in Tobago this weekend trying to just keep my sanity, to be honest, because it has been. I met Renuka the other day in our office, and I think we both just wanted to fall down and cry. It has been the roughest 16 days ever. It's been just
tragic.
Yeah, and I'm thinking Shannon Banfield was killed December 2016, and it was the same energy, the same everything, and here we are, and it's just, I'm having a hard time, not in a sense not feel, managing the weight of it. And we were talking about the necessity of community conversation. So a music, I was in Castara, which is a lovely village, little fishing village, and a music truck drove by with police, right? Loud, blaring music trucks. I'm like, wow, what is this? Maybe it's elections, but it's a little early for elections, right? So then we were talking to the old ladies who bake bread in the oven, and older ladies, and they said, oh, it was a truck, and the truck was talking messages about violence against women, right? And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. They have a truck going around community to community saying something
Spreading
about violence
information.
against women, and I thought, wow, that's really interesting. But yet at the same time, when the truck passed where we were, right, along the roadside, all I heard was like fat music, right?
Mhm.
I was like, well, why weren't they sending the message along the whole route? So at the same time, we have to be so vigilant, because we talk about going into communities and we talk about reaching communities, reaching out of, whether it's urban spaces or particular kinds of social media or elite discussions and so on. And yet sometimes it's done in a way that is just not sufficient. It's done in a way that doesn't stop in a space for a few hours. And I don't know how much you could give a message from a truck, moving on
Just driving by.
without coming out and going and taking your social workers, 3 or 4 social workers with you, and having them have the conversation with people, come at 2 o'clock, come between 2 and 3, everybody. We have people here if you want to talk, and so I think there's also that we have to do it well if we're doing it at a community level. We can't just check a box and say that we are, because when you're out there in the communities and then you see it being done badly or superficially, or you see the wrong people being brought to the community and saying, in the midst of some good things, some really problematic things also, then you realize that we can say we're doing that important work, and yet we are not taking it. We're not taking how how important every bit of it is. How
Every aspect of it.
yes, all of it matters, and
Mhm.
really valuing the community enough to do it well in the times we go out. So I've been thinking again. We keep talking about going in community, but we really do have to have the right people, whether it's the right social workers, the right people working in child protection, like all of the kinds of people that are out there who can do that, whether we do it a day at health centers and so on. But we can't just check a box when we say community,
I agree.
and I think that's important for us to remember.
Yeah, I agree. And at this time, there are two things that we want to have happen. First off, we want to run. So part of this conversation, part of the reason why this conversation was important was to remind people that actually women are doing, organizations are doing, and we've not just been sitting by and letting what's been happening happen. And so we're going to open up the floor right now to take some questions. But while we're doing that on the screen, I want to run some images from an event that was organized last week by IGDS Ignite and Feminite. Ashley Burnett of Feminite was unable to join us tonight, but I see she's in the comments, and I'm so happy to have you in the comments. Also, the t-shirt that I'm wearing tonight was provided by Feminite as another part of, conversation starters, those day-to-day engagers. So while we see these beautiful pictures come up on screen, let's bring up some of these comments. I know we have some questions. What's our first question? Liam recently says, is anywhere in the Caribbean getting it right or doing it better? And by that, I think he's asking, is it just us in Trinidad that's in this state, or,
Yes, one good example is the Partnership for Peace program in Grenada. That has been doing its court-ordered work with perpetrators. They've been active for at least a decade. They have an excellent evaluation. And I think that we need to have court-ordered perpetrator programs in Trinidad and Tobago, such as the Partnership for Peace program in Grenada, which is most definitely a best case.
Okay. And when you say, just tell us, sorry, Steph, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that in terms of legislation and policy, I think that Antigua and Barbuda has a far more robust system than many of the other islands. But parallel to that, we see that gender-based violence and domestic violence is particularly high in Antigua and Barbuda.
Right.
So this whole notion of getting it right is not one-dimensional. And so you might have robust policy and legislation, but women are still being murdered. So it just speaks to the amount of intervention, as we've been saying, at the family level, at the community level, and at the state level, that needs to be happening in tandem to really make a dent in gender-based violence.
And Steph, would you say that's similar to here? Because I believe also, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we also do have robust laws against gender-based violence, but there's not the follow-through up to conviction.
Yeah, well, Trinidad had like model legislation since the 80s, and the Domestic Violence Act has been recently amended with some really, really important changes to the legislation. So I would say yes, there is still room for improvement, but our legislation is strong. But again, how is that being felt on the ground? How is it being reconciled by families who are continuing to lose their children?
Let's see if we have any other questions in the comments.
Actually, a best case is I think, I mean, Liam asked about it, the women's movement in the Caribbean from organizations such as Womantra, young women's organizations. Womantra is now 10 years old. I don't know that, that's adolescent, not so much young anymore. And young organizations like Feminite and the Ignites and Catcalls. I mean, to be honest, in the region, we have an incredibly committed and savvy and and creative feminist and women's movement that I think are examples of excellent advocacy and movement building. I mean, the fact that we haven't achieved, we haven't destroyed patriarchy is a result of the power and resilience of patriarchy. But we are, and its intersections, racism, classism, homophobia. But I think looking at the kinds of organizing and women's work that happens in the Caribbean, feminist work and LGBT work to challenge violence is definitely best case. And it's so nice to see these pictures from a young feminist organization as well, just as an example.
It definitely is. I just wanted to add something on that topic of legislation that we discussed a while before, while we also await the establishment of refugee law. I'm not sure how long we will wait, but I wanted to emphasize that because it is not disconnected from the experiences or from the violence, from degrees of ownership, from dependency. All of these matters are not disconnected. And it's why I advocate for the establishment of refugee law, but also for the understanding of the connection. Because if women feel empowered, if displaced women feel empowered through legislation, then that means that there's all of the factors that put them at risk will diminish.
Yes, the factors begin to have less potency, and I think we're gonna have to bring the conversation to a close there, our panel conversation. But there's one last question. Let's stop the screen share. There's one last question that I want to bring up, which deals with the conversations with men. And so less about that question and more about my question to you all is there. Let's end on this note, right? The people perpetrating the violence against women are men. That's not all men, and it doesn't mean that the kind of violence that these men that are perpetrating, it doesn't mean that all men possess within them that kind of violence and animosity, but it is something nevertheless we have to address. And so my question to you all specifically, how do we balance? How do we strike that line, that balance between hitting the nail on the head, dealing with the problem, dealing with it effectively, but also carrying that space to know, this is such a nuanced conversation that when we talk about men. It's
always interesting when we talk about men because, there's the right response and then there's the right response. But but you know, a lot of times when we end up, you know, when we talk in our circles and we try to figure out, you know, how do we get to men? We realize a lot of times we have to pander to men, because a lot of times, you know, the violence enacted upon women, not only just physical violence at an intimate level or so, but it stems from entitlement. Right. And a lot of times men navigate this world with so much entitlement, and they think when we as activists or as feminists talk about it, they think we're anti-man, and you know, we're attacking men. But no, you're not attacking men, especially not on an individual level, because as you said, you know, there are different men who come with different capabilities and have different beliefs. But as an institution or as a collective, men represent a threat, you know. And at IGDS, we had the Pull Up Your Brethren campaign a few years ago under the Sexual Cultural Justice Project. And, you know, we keep using that tagline, and we ever so often will reshare the videos, because it's important that men have these conversations with men. Men aren't listening to women. Women have been speaking for decades upon decades upon decades, and they're not listening to us. So that's why when we say men, you need to step up, we really mean men, you need to step up and be a part of this conversation, and not in a way that it's just like, oh, well, you do this, but not me, or what. No, take ownership of your own role in how you shape the conversation too. So hold your brethren accountable. And I'll share a quick story. We were going somewhere the other day, and the taxi driver, he shared that, you know, he had two brethren. So I was telling Dr. Hosein, he has two brethren who refuse to look after their children. So he cut them off. And
Okay.
talk to them. And, you know, and for me, I've never heard that come from a man before. And I was pleasantly surprised, and I was really pleased, because for me, that represented a man holding other men accountable. You know, you're failing as a man.
Most primal places of influence. And I think men don't necessarily recognize that. Some men don't recognize how much influence they have in that capacity.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be anything profound. It could be just, you know, you start in that
less profound, the better. For men, in less profound, the better.
I want to say something.
I wish that men. Oh no, go ahead, Dr. Hosein.
You know, I've had a lot of men coming up to me, you know, they message and so on, you know, saying, how can I get involved, or, you know, being concerned about the level of violence against women in a way that we all are. And at the same time as they are willing and interested, I've had so many of them challenge me and say, well, I don't know if saying that violence is about men and or about masculinity, you know, and I don't know if framing it that way is really helpful for men. And sometimes I've had to say to them, listen, I know our language makes you uncomfortable, but maybe you need to sit with that discomfort, because we've been in this work for decades and decades, you know, decades. This is not language that we're coming at out of just anger or, you know, some kind of ill thought reaction. Like maybe you just, instead of sort of coming and going, listen, I don't know if your language is meeting men where they are. I don't know if your language is working. I don't know if it's bringing men in. It's making men feel alienated. Go, you know, just sit for a second with that discomfort you're feeling and go, what is it, you know, that's going on in me that it's making me react in those ways, that is making me want to go to these women and say, you're not doing something right, actually. You know, maybe we are giving the right message, but maybe they're just so difficult and complex and nuanced that it takes time for you to think about what your reaction is before coming back with an opinion about it. And I have found that those guys, and actually Kevin Liverpool did an excellent interview in the newspaper, I thought, where he answered a number of questions, and he's working with Kariman, and I've seen growth. Those men who breathe with it, take the time, and then we'll come back later on and go, well, actually, I've thought about it. I understand so much more about what you all are saying because I've given myself the space to understand. I find it so much easier for us to connect and also for us to explain without feeling that we're put on the defensive to defend something that we know is well thought out, we know is discomforting, but which is a reality which men must be prepared to take on if they're
Yeah.
going to come in this work as allies and not come in this work in a sense to undermine what it is we know we're trying to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Steph, you're gonna.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be long because I think everybody said enough.
That's quite all right.
But perhaps to be slightly more blunt, I
Mhm.
think continuing to ask feminists and women to work with men is in fact a form of violence. It
Okay.
is violence. It is
Mhm.
intellectual violence because whenever we enter into conversations with men about why violence against women is not okay, is a problem, it gets into this intellectual space of, well, not all men, some men are good. You're using the wrong language, as we spoke about all of that, the pandering, etc. And it's really not our work anymore. As
Right.
Stein said, we have been speaking to you for decades. We are still being killed. And the
Yes.
expectation that we continue to do this work with men who are being violent to us is violence.
Yeah.
And so to repeat and emphasize, reiterate what Renuka said, now is the time for men to step up and to have conversations with other men. There is no other way. We have tried everything else.
Thank you. Yeah, and that was the last point that I was going to add, is that, so then who needs to have the conversation? And you're right, it's men. Men need to have the conversation with their brethren. So hashtag pull up your brethrens. I'm going to wrap our panel discussion there. Ladies, we have come into the red zone for this show, but it's because this entire nation is currently in the red zone. And this conversation that we had tonight was so important, and getting you all to lend your perspectives. You all are the women that are actually doing the work. This is a conversation with frontliners. Each of you in your own way are doing the work that needs to be done. And I really, really wanted to emphasize that and give you all this platform and say thank you. We don't take our time in Trinidad and Tobago. We don't take our time to honor our living and active while they are living and active. And so to each of you women in each of your capacities tonight, I honor you. I celebrate you. I am grateful for you and your work. We have some comments coming up there. But we're going to take this time to wrap up the panel. We have some people that are saying thank you all so much. It's been such a great conversation. Ladies, we have some things still lined up in store. We're going to have a further little follow-up conversation with Womantra to chat about the document that they've released. But before we move on to that, I want to say thank you all for this panel conversation. It's been so great.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
very
the
much.
panel.
And we're going to keep in touch. We're going to touch base with each of you again as the season goes on. Yeah. So thank you all again.
Thank you.
Ladies and gents, don't go anywhere. We have much more in store. Right. So coming up next on Everything A to Zoe, that was a very enriching community check-in panel conversation with Dr. Gabrielle Hosein for the Institute of Gender Development, and also Staphanie Leitch of Womantra, Amanda Chukwan, who is author and works closely with refugees and survivors of Venezuelan migrants, and also Renuka Ananjit, who is a research assistant and PhD candidate at the IGDS at UE. So ladies, once again, thank you all for joining me. And as I said, we're not finished with the show yet. We're close to time, but we're not finished yet. I want to jump into, we're going to bring Staphanie back on screen to have a very important conversation. But before we jump into that conversation, I wanted to just break the ice, break the silence a little bit with a unique hot headline. Let's go with hot headlines. Hot headlines. All right, in this quick hot headline, I'm going to give you a quick hot headline. In this quick hot headline, this was a release by the TTPS. Where's the image, the main image? This was a release by the TTPS that came up. You're going to send me mad, They don't have it. Let's go straight to the interview. So we had a great hot headline lined up for you all, but we're going to skip that. Let's go straight to the interview. Let me bring up Staphanie Leitch. Staphanie Leitch is the director of Womantra, and Womantra is doing some great work in their Journey to Justice, a Survivor's Handbook. Welcome back, Staphanie.
Glad to be back.
So I was just going to do a quick hot headline there that reference. You saw that post that the TTPS posted about that gun, that handmade gun. And there was just some unique comments under it. And I thought, even the comments are such a unique insight into, where our mind is at. But as I said before, one of the reasons we had this episode is to talk about women in action. And Womantra is one of those organizations leading the charge, leading the action. And so what I want to bring up is Journey to Justice, a Survivor's Guide Handbook. Yeah. So tell us a bit more. We're going to put it up on the screen and we're going to go through it as we chat. So tell us a bit more about the Survivor's Handbook.
Sure. So I am happy to bring to you the good word, Journey to Justice. This, as you can see from the title, is a book for survivors or for anybody that needs information about gender-based violence and how they gain access to services and support. As I had mentioned earlier on in the interview, a lot of people feel really isolated when they are, suffering an abusive situation and they don't know where to turn to. We know, for example, through a national study that only 5% of victims actually report to the police. Which is a really alarmingly low statistic. And so a major part of this handbook is looking at how survivors can access legal justice through dealing with the police. There's a special rights-based section to help women or any other person access justice. So we can
let's turn some of the pages. Let's see.
Okay.
So there we have our disclaimer, acknowledgements.
Yes. So our dedication here is to Leah Gordon, who was a very special person to Womantra, a friend. And she was a champion against gender-based violence. And she recently passed away. And so we really wanted to dedicate this book to her memory.
Okay, wow. Love that.
So then we have our table of contents, which looks like a little flag. So you can navigate your way. And part of what we encourage readers to do, particularly if you think you might be in an emergency situation, is that you familiarize yourself with the contents of the manual so that you can access the information quickly.
So you know where to go for what you need.
Exactly.
Nice.
Okay. Right. So the start of the handbook is really just to get you oriented on the terminology of gender-based violence and, how, for example, it differs from domestic violence, because we use these terms interchangeably, but also gender-based violence is still newer language to Trinidadian people. We're accustomed hearing domestic violence. So what is the difference? And then also you see an umbrella there.
Yes, I was going to bring up the umbrella.
Yeah, with some specific terms that might not be familiar to people, but are some of the aspects of gender-based violence. So we have there revenge porn, cyberbullying, victim blaming, femicide, and gaslighting.
Right.
So a part of, talking about gender-based violence is identifying the language to talk about gender-based violence. Because believe it or not, victims are meant to feel crazy because they cannot describe their situation. And this was true for many decades before the language was developed to explain experiences, and particularly women's experiences. So it's important for us to be open to learning the terminology to describe our experiences.
I love that. Very important.
Okay. Right. So then we're starting our journey to justice. Talking about some of the warning signs. And in the text there, we talk about it being a lot more difficult to sometimes see those warning signs when you are in a love relationship.
Right, and to pick them out.
And it was really important for me to write this book in the most non-judgmental way that I could manage, because a lot of women are meant to feel stupid or dotish because they're in an abusive relationship. Why don't just leave, all of these kinds of things. But it is very difficult, particularly when you have strong positive or love emotions for your partner, to understand just how serious a problem is.
And how much in danger you might really be in.
Exactly. And then we have this section here, which is a trigger warning, encouraging people to take care of themselves, while they're going through the next sections, because on the following pages, we have 4 tables that can help folks identify whether or not they are in abusive relationships.
Okay, so this becomes kind of like a workbook for yourself.
Exactly.
And those trigger warnings that you had at the beginning kind of prepare the participants. We're going to ask you some, unique questions that may bring up some emotions. I love that. I love that sensitivity.
Yes, that was definitely through the recommendation of Elise Marcelin, who's also a director, yes, and has a background in clinical psychology. And that's why it's important to have people with different disciplines and skill sets preparing a handbook like this, particularly people who have experienced trauma. But what is very special about these tables, because you see them online, right? They're kind of generic ones that exist online that you can find. But what is unique about these tables is that it is based on our specific laws. So what I did is I went through the laws and listed all of the offenses that are listed under the Domestic Violence Act, and they are all listed here, so that you can not only identify whether or not you are in an abusive relationship, but this is also a very important evidence gathering tool, so that if you are seeking legal recourse, you can fill out this table and give it to your attorney, so that you would make the job a lot easier for them, because these are the laws. This is how this person has been affecting you.
Right. Yeah. And so this is how I can now seek recourse through these. Yeah. Exactly. Wow. Great. Let's keep on going. Yeah.
And also, what I would like to mention again about these tables is that in the orange there, you see we have a little tip, which is encouraging people to use different markers for when offenses were perpetrated against them versus when they were the perpetrators.
Right. Okay.
And again, this is very important because secondary abuse is quite common in abusive relationships. It's not always so clear-cut that one person is a perpetrator and one person is a victim. Oftentimes, abused people can become violent as well, or abusive. And so it's important for folks who are filling out these tables to be as honest as possible, so that you can make a proper evaluation about what help you need to take care of yourself and also to protect yourself from outside harm.
Okay. Okay, great. Let's keep on going.
Right. So next steps. So we have the terminology. we have our tables to know whether or not you're being abused. What is the next?
To know the situation that you're in.
Exactly. So this is our mapping services section, which is very comprehensive, and we're starting off here with hotline numbers. Now, what is special about hotlines is that, well, the idea is that they are available 24 hours a day. So this is the benefit of having hotline numbers. So no matter what time of the day or night, you should be able to access listeners at these numbers. So we have state-run hotlines, NGO hotlines, and the ones with the asterisk indicate which organizations have Spanish speakers.
Wow. Beautiful.
And
Okay,
then,
great.
yeah, and then we have the regular emergency numbers.
Right. Great, great. So these are the regular. So these are like the special divisions.
Right. So, as most people are aware now, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has a gender-based violence unit,
Right.
with specially trained officers to deal with gender-based violence cases. So there is not an officer attached to this division at every police station, but the ones where they are all listed there, as well as their telephone numbers. So that if there isn't an officer stationed in your district, you can just contact the one that is nearest to you.
Fab. Staphanie, I know we were going to go through the entire handbook, but we're running a little tight on time. So I wanted to ask, I know that the users can go to the website and check out the handbook and go, but is there anything else before we just close it off that you really want people to just know that there's in there for them?
Yes, definitely. So as I said before, there's a right section. I don't know if you can go forward to the right section. No, forward. You're going back.
My producer, like he had a little drink stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, so no, go forward.
Forward.
Right. Perfect. So this section for me, I think is really important because it's information that people do not regularly have. We do not have proper state, web services or sources that clearly give people information.
This kind of information. Yeah.
And I learned some very interesting things in my research that can really help people navigate reporting to the police. So as you can see here, you have a right to make a report at any station. Police always say, oh, you have to go there, you have to go there. No. So we are not only saying, yes, you have the right to, but we've also listed what the departmental order is so that you know this is an actual rule and that the police have to take your report, etc. And so there's a lot of that kind of information, as well as accessing medical services. So I would really encourage everyone to please read this booklet, to share it with every woman you know, every person you know, download it, and it will soon be available in health clinics throughout the country in the new year.
Staphanie, thank you so much. We're gonna post up a special link of the Survivors Guide Handbook. We're gonna post it on our page so that people could access it and continue reposting the work of Womantra. You all are doing such great work. Thank you again. Thank you for joining us, and we're gonna keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks so much for giving us this platform, Zoe. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My absolute pleasure. Chat soon. All right, folks, we've come to the end of our show tonight. But I can't leave you just like that. I can't leave you to just go like that. Let's bring back up that hot headlines now. We had such a dense show discussing so many topics that are so important that I really wanted to leave you all on a note of just, reminding you that in as much as there's so much negative happening and there's so many aspects of our society that we have to fix and we have to pay attention to and we can't take it lightly. There's also still so much that, we bring into the picture to remind us this is all a part of who we are. So in your hot headlines, let's show them that gun. Let's show them that gun. All right, yesterday TTPS posted this unique thing and they were saying, they went on a routine patrol. They can't find all the men perpetrating violence against women, but they could find the wheat fields from above with a helicopter and they could find guns, right? They could find unique, homemade, handmade guns that could shoot who? We don't know. This was the gun that they found. And let's bring up, the reason I wanted to bring this up is because we had such comments of gold. Let's show them some of the comments now. This was one of the first comments. Yes, study you go to sleep tonight and this man done rob you tomorrow with that gun. What's the next one? That's it. By the time the bullet reached the end of the barrel, it dead. Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Get him a next one. When Moses was writing the commandments, this gun was being made in the background. You're right. You're right. One more. One more for the road. Imagine standing by Toko Lighthouse and killing a man minding his own business in Scarborough. Yes, ethnography 10. Yeah. That was a quick hot headlines. All right, folks, we've come to the end of the episode, as I said. Before we wrap up, though, I still have two more things before we wrap. Where's my HG and PG rum? Where is my HG and PG rum punch? Come on. Thank you. Ladies and gents, something that I wanted to bring to you. We have unique sponsors of this episode. You see this beautiful bottle here? This beautiful bottle of look at the color. Look at, you have to turn her upside down. You have to turn her upside down and get all these sediments going, because this was made from real homemade limes, homemade grapefruit. This is HG and PG homemade rum punch, right? For the Christmas season, one of the staples in Trinidad and Tobago is rum punch. And so I encourage you all, if you're looking for a great rum punch for the season, where my empty bottle too? Hello? If y'all are looking for great, it's a great gift, or is great. Yes, we're gonna do that. It's a great gift. So it's just great, even just for yourself, right? This size is 65. They have a larger size that's 120. And also, beyond just rum punch, HG&PG will sell you this beautifully decorated bottle. So let's say you have your own rum punch, but you like a pretty bottle. You can buy the bottle, you know, something unique. So contact HG&PG at 756-6415. Once again, HG&PG rum punch. I don't even want to take a sip because the rum and me, it ain't gonna work out, right? But something nice for the Christmas. Something also nice for Christmas. Finally, y'all, I know we're into 1 hour, 15 minutes. But guess what? It's COVID. Time doesn't exist anymore. The last segment I want to leave you with tonight is another beautiful installment of On My Xmas record. And this time we have an a cappella rendition by Pacino. Let's take it in.
The first Noel, the angel did say, was a certain poor shepherd in fields as they lay, in fields where they lay keeping their sheep on a cold winter night that was so deep. Noel, 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 Noel. Born is the King of Israel. Noel, 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 Noel. Born is the King. Born is the King of Israel. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. No, thank you, Pacino. Thank you. That was a beautiful rendition. Folks, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We had so many people inside this session. I'm so grateful. Thank you to all of our guests, Dr. Gabrielle Hosein at IGDS, Staphanie Leitch of Womantra, Amanda Chukwan, and Renuka Ananjit. Thank you all, ladies, for joining us. Let's get final comments. Everybody on the inside, thank you all so much. It was so lovely having you. We hope you enjoyed episode 3. of Everything A to Zoe. I'm your host, Zoe Sazzle, reminding you yet again that love is love. Everybody is somebody. Don't forget to like, follow, share, and subscribe everywhere. We're at Zoe Sazzle and we're at Everything A to Zoe. Also, Everything A to Zoe is a production of Xmas Studios, and everybody involved, we felt the effects of COVID-19, so we welcome any contributions that you may have to share with us. And finally, I want to say a special thanks to all of the team at Xmas Studios, Mr. Nigel Williams, who is our technical producer, Amir Hall, director and show writer, Ali Villarreal. She's our SSMM and graphics world boss. We also have Nadia Shah, who built our set, and so many other people contribute to the show. We want to say thank you to you all. Once again, don't forget, HG and PG rampant! Bye, everybody. Love you all. Next week, we're on again, Monday. It's going to be fabulous. Bye.